Today on Car Attractions, you join me on a very, very chilly Saturday morning. It's been a while since I've been in the shed, and there's even condensation on there. Like, I'm used to not being able to see out just because of the amount of cobwebs on the windows that you get in this shed, but no, condensation on the windows, which is very, very strange indeed. But I'm braving the elements this morning to give you a little video about my opinion and a bit of the history about the Triumph GT6, a great six-cylinder GT classic British sports car. It's one of my favourites. If you watch my show walk around videos, I always go mad over one of these. So let's take a closer look at where the GT6 came from. Well, I think first of all, let's look where this fantastic, capable 2-litre straight six that went into the GT6 came from. And it was first seen from standard. It was first seen in the Vanguard 6 as a 2-litre unit. It was developed from the standard SC4, which is the 803cc, and then 948cc seen in the standard 8 and 10, just like our little 8 over there. So that was first used in 1960, and then we have to remember standard actually bought Triumph in 1945, that's why you see standard Triumph, and then Triumph decided to use this 2-litre engine, although they did reduce it to a 1.6 size in the Triumph Vitesse, which is the Mark 1. The first of those, you do notice they're quite rare. They have a 1.6 engine, which is the 6 on the version of the Herald. The first of those were reduced to a 1.6, and then the Mark 2 came along in 1966, and that had a 2-litre straight 6 in it, and then basically the foundations were placed for a brilliant engine that was used in many cars. It was enlarged to 2.5 litres for the Triumph 2.5 PI, the saloon car, the TR6, the TR5, before they went to a 4-cylinder in the TR7. The exact same engine was used in the Triumph 2000, which is a very handsome car in my opinion, and of course it was used in the GT6, and it really was a fantastic sounding unit, I must say. But actually, a little known fact is Triumph didn't originally intend to put the 2-litre straight 6 into the GT6 body. I've got a very handy book here, the Triumph Spitfire and GT6 that I've been using for my research. Yes, I do use screwdrivers as bookmarks, and here we can see the original Triumph GT4, this was called, the prototype. So this was the Michelotti designed body. This was designed in Turin. A lot of Triumph cars were designed by Michelotti later on, and this had the 1147cc engine from the likes of the Triumph Spitfire. That's a slightly different one there, but the Triumph Spitfire, like this brochure here, this is from a Mark IV, which is from Dad's collection, but they used, it might have been like a Mark II or something, I'm not exactly sure the dates, but they used a 4-cylinder in this body, and you can see the slight design differences to the refined GT6. We've got an extra little hump in the bonnet there, but with just the 1147cc 4-cylinder, a lot of people said who drove it that it was really quite slow because of obviously the additional weight of the GT body. You can see a few differences with the body from these original photos. So then Triumph decided to deploy its beautiful straight 6 2-litre unit. So in 1966 Triumph debuted its Mark 1 GT6, which really was a sophisticated car. Its main rival really was the MGB and the sort of classic GTs as they are now, and those had a 4-cylinder which was probably seen as a little bit more dated than the Triumph 6-cylinder engine, the MGB obviously having the B series 1.8. and the Triumph, the 2-litre straight 6, but originally this car was well received. People who had owned Spitfires before might have been a little bit put off, as it had softer damper settings than the likes of the Spitfires, often because it's a heavier car, but it was also very much geared towards the American market, and of course that's what Americans wanted at the time. Triumph always, and MG at the same time, they were always trying to go to the American market, and the GT6 did sell relatively well, at least the earlier ones. In the American market, they sold in the UK for £800, which was quite reasonable for the time, and they were a very, very lovely looking car. I think they're one of the best looking marks of GT6s, but one thing to notice about them is people did complain about their handling quite a lot, the Mark 1, because the Mark 1 used a very, very simple rear suspension setup, which was known as the swing axle setup, which did promote a lot of lift off oversteer. So you're pressing on into a corner, for whatever reason you decide to brake or lift off mid-corner, and suddenly the back end of the car swaps around, which was probably quite a sort of scary thing for like novice drivers at the time, and it just was quite an awkward thing, and it sort of did plague the likes of the Mark 1 GT6. For the Mark 2 they really did need to sort out that rear suspension. And thankfully in 1968, when the Mark II GT6 sold as the GT6 Plus in America, did improve all of these rear suspension issues, to the point that the Autocar said the new rear suspension greatly improves road holding and handling, which was great for Triumph. This car sold very well. It now cost you £879, which is probably still not bad. I don't exactly know how much the MGB was, but I think the Triumph was always a slightly more upmarket car than the MGB, having a 6-cylinder, etc. Now this was because they used a Rotoflex rear suspension unit, which was quite an expensive unit, I'm led to believe. It was quite elaborate and complicated, so I don't know how it works. If anyone does know how it works, like exactly the rear suspension, give us a type in the comments below, because I'd love to learn a little bit more about these suspension setups. There's also a big design difference between the Mark 1 and the Mark 2 GT6. This was because it had a raised bumper. It had like a bumper going around all the front of the car, as there was like more of an exposed grille, and the Mark 1 GT6, and you can liken the Mark 1 GT6 to the likes of the Mark 1 and 2 Spitfires. They have a very similar front, but for the Mark 3 Spitfire, the 4-cylinder roadsters, they had the same higher bumper as the Mark II GT6, and they're still a brilliant looking car, and thankfully they did sell very well as the Spitfire and the Mark II GT6. And in 1970 the final iteration of the original GT6 design was released, and this one had quite a difference in styling. And before we just go on to that, this also had the Rotoflex rear end originally, but probably to save money they went to a simpler suspension setup later on in production, but thankfully this did not have the lift-off oversteer problems that the original swing axle system had. And the main difference that most people will see with the Mark III GT6 is the cut-off tail, which was designed to look like this. This car is the Mark IV Spitfire, which is obviously the 4-cylinder roadster, and as we can see on the back here, hopefully you can see that this has got the much more cut-off tail than the likes of the curvy backs of the earlier Spitfires and earlier GT6s, and this was, as I said, designed to sort of match the Spitfire 4, Mark IV like this one. And there's also the Triumph 2, I've just dropped that, the Triumph 2000, the Triumph Stag, Triumph Dolomite, all those cars had the cut-off tail, the TR6 as well, the Triumph Stag. And all those cars had this cut-off tail, which is very sort of distinctive of Triumph at the time. All those cars were Michelotti designed, I think, so it was sort of like a sort of stamp of Michelotti designed. And I think, to be honest, that was probably quite a modern design at the time, because even as the GT4 prototype with the 4-cylinder, which never made it onto the roads as a production car, it still got some really sort of lovely looking sharp lines, and for the Mark III it just tapers back into a lovely cut-off tail. And some people prefer the curvy tail, some people prefer the cut-off tail, but generally at classic car shows the Mark III GT6 is the most popular. And if you're like struggling to identify if it's a Mark III, it usually says there's a little badge on the bonnet, and then if it's got a cut-off tail then it's a post-1970 car, making it Mark III GT6. Now I have actually got a brochure for a Mark III GT6 Spitfire, which has some very flowery language in it, let's say, so let's have a little closer look at that. And here is the brochure for the Mark III GT6. There's a lovely bit of ephemera here, and basically talks about a very exotic couple going for a very brisk drive to some form of rendezvous. It describes the car as poised for action, a slender saffron-coloured missile on the launch pad. Inside, the uncompromising efficiency of its instrumentation and control layout is a graphic message of power and performance. And in the next section, which is called A Passport to Excitement, it's got some great photos. And yes, I love these old brochures, they're great, aren't they? 2 hours and well over 200 kilometres are passed in smooth, swift safety. It says they're cruising easily at 95. The man is driving now, and the car seems to sense his greater experience, reacting to his firm commands with the speed of thought. Accelerating hard, he breasts a steep slope, brakes hard to avoid the judiciously positioned farm cart. Then up again through the gears to 50 in 8 seconds, 60 in 10.5. He holds third until the tachometer reads needle pushes 6,000 and the speedometer reads 96. Then he deftly nudges the stubby gear shift into top gear. Blind right-hander ahead. A touch of brake, 2 brief throaty snarls from the engine as he whips through the box, a barely perceptible movement of the leather-clad wheel. Then the yellow car is powering its way through the bend. Radials bite deep into the rough surface, finding grip amongst the stones and shale. Rear wishbones stiffen as they defy gravity. This is just a great bit of reading here. The car has brought them to their rendezvous. This last section is called Styled for the Fast Life. You can see the sort of target market, everyone going for the exotic life if they buy a GT6. And then it just talks about everything about the car looks right. From the smart new door handles to the lockable fuel filler cap, from the new shaped rear quarter lights to the impressive wheel trims. Then, with turbine smoothness and reliability, the GT6 Mark III speeds them to their final rendezvous. For them, the adventure is over. For you, dear reader, it has yet to begin. We've even got a few stats on the back of this lovely old brochure. I'll go through the engine ones as they're the most interesting. Number of cylinders 6, capacity 1998cc or 122 cubic inches for the American market. Max power 98 brake horsepower, 5,300 RPM. We've got maximum speed at 112 mph depending on conditions. Carburetors twin Stromberg, 1.5 CD side draft. We've got brakes, caliper disc type, disc diameter 9.7 inches, 264 millimeters. 3-spoke steering wheel, 15 inches. Steel disc type steering wheel, 4.5J rims, polycarbonate wheel trims with chromium plated dome nuts. Now, these obviously originally on 4.5Js, but there is actually someone we know just down the road from here, and his has got some 5.5J wheels, which are quite a bit wider. I think they're off like Formula Ford or something similar to that, and his car looks absolutely great. It's a stunning Mark III GT6, but if you can get hold of some 5.5Js, they look absolutely fantastic on one of these GT6s. But to be honest, doesn't that just look fantastic? Just like that, exactly original as it would have come out of the Triumph factory from 1970 onwards. And towards the mid to late 70s, the GT6 unfortunately became a bit outdated. There's no Mark IV GT6 as Triumph started to move away from traditional sports cars to slightly wackier and more trendy cars. An example of this is probably the Triumph TR7, a completely different looking car to the more like its predecessor, the traditional Triumph TR6, and the GT6 was that. They didn't make many of them at all, only a few 10,000. It's not like the MGB, which you see absolutely everywhere. It's quite a rare car that you see at classic car shows, where you'll probably see one of these for every 5 or 6 MGB GTs you see. They always sound fantastic with that lovely engine. I always wonder what they'd be like with the 2.5 unit in it, making about 150 brake horsepower. Some people have swapped them, but I always thought what could have been if Triumph put the 2.5 originally in the GT6, perhaps as a Mark IV. That would have made a very exciting car, because my dad used to have a Mark III Spitfire, and that had a 2.5 straight 6 in it, which sounded very nice. I'm sure I wasn't around for it, and it did sound like it went quite well. So that in a GT6, lovely body, would be very good. But to be honest, the 2 litre straight 6, so 100 brake horsepower ish. The earlier cars were actually slightly more powerful. I want to say the Mark II was like 105 or something like that, so it actually ended up making more power than the Mark III. But to be honest, there's going to be very little difference at all, and it's more about the sound for me. If I was to be offered like a more modern car with the value of about, I don't know, 10 to 15,000 like most GT6s seem to be, I'd obviously choose a GT6 just for the driving experience. They drive really fantastically. I did get a ride in one, our friend one on the 5.5Js a couple of years ago probably, and it was a lovely car. Easily cruised at about 90 mph, as it said in the brochure over there, which was, it was quite an experience. It's a very lovely car, and that's why it's one of my favourite classic British sports cars. One of the slightly more left field options, you could say, as are the Triumph Spitfires. You see more Spitfires obviously because a lot of the GT6s went over to America. I don't know how many there are still in America. If there's anyone from America or Australia, some of you guys watch from Australia, then I'd love to know if you've ever seen a Triumph GT6 of any sort. Now I think I'll probably be wrapping up this video somewhere about here. I'm sure you can tell I absolutely love these GT6s. I'd love to hear your thoughts on GT6s, if you've owned one, if you remember them coming out, if you've seen anyone having a GT6 at a classic car show. Please do let me know in the comments below. But for now, please remember to subscribe, check out that channel homepage for GT6 content at classic car shows and some of my other classic car history and review videos, and that's pretty much it. Bye for now.